Where are we here?
So on the bottom of the screen in the middle.
Got it? Yep, there
Okay.
you are. Okay.
Okay, there we go. Let's try this again. Okay, so can everybody see my screen? Just a thumbs up, Dawn?
Yep.
Okay, great. So here today to talk to you about disclosure and accommodations. And a lot of these subjects that we talk about around disability and diversity inclusion, they interact with each other, they build upon each other. So, you might have, we're going to cover and touch on the AODA again, but we hope to keep building your knowledge base so that you build your comfort level with this. So because we're a small group, I'm going to encourage you to pop your questions in the chat or simply to unmute and ask questions if you have them. The odds are, if you have that question, somebody else who's watching this probably will as well. So, like to recap, what is discoverability? How do you get there? Well, it's Sue.discoverability.network is how you enter the Sault Ste. Marie Chamber of Commerce landing page for discoverability. There's really 3 elements to the program. The first is our job matching platform, which connects job seekers who have a disability, but also have the skills and abilities that you're looking for with youth businesses. The second thing is we offer free training on a whole bunch of different topics. Today's on disclosure and accommodations. And third is networking opportunities. So a chance for you as an employer to meet candidates with a disability, build up your comfort level, perhaps identify some high potential candidates that you might want to recruit down the road. And for the candidates, it's a chance to talk about their skills and abilities, to learn a little bit more about what you do and how you're an inclusive employer, and just build confidence between the two of you. So today, what are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about disclosure. Then we're going to talk about accommodations, because in effect, they're kind of the same thing. They're 2 sides of a coin. So you can't have you rarely have disclosure without people asking for an accommodation. And if somebody asks for an accommodation, they are disclosing. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about how to build inclusion in your business, particularly around disclosure and accommodations. And it's really not that challenging or that difficult. And some of the practices we'll share with you are actually best practices for, whether or not you've built it into your D&I structure, your diversity and inclusion. They're just great standards to have with all your employees. Any questions or anything that you'd like me to cover, particularly around disclosure, that you'd like me to address that maybe you're not sure I'm going to cover or that comes to mind? Nope. Okay. So let's go back to the AODA. I don't generally like to start with legislation because I think legislation is kind of the bare minimum of what we need to achieve, but it is a good guideline of where we can start. So the AODA or AODA, depending on what your preference is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. It's trying to create an accessible Ontario by 2025. How you implement accessibility in 5 key areas. They're called standards, and they're the rules business and organizations should follow to prevent and remove barriers for people with disabilities. Now, how you do that isn't legislated. It's just legislated that you should do that. And it applies to all organizations and businesses with 1 or more employees in Ontario that provide goods or services to the public or to other businesses and services in organizations in Ontario. Okay, so we're all defined by this. There are 5 accessibility standards. Again, not going to get too much into this. You can see the 5. There's the customer service standard, which you should already be implementing. There's information and communications. There's employment, which we are going to talk about today. These are all actually, grouped together into the integrated accessibility standard. There's transportation, and there's design of public spaces. We're going to speak specifically to the employment standard today. So workplaces must be accessible to potential, so that means to job seekers or current workers who have a disability. This isn't extras. Okay, I really want to make that clear. We're not adding anything. All we're doing is allowing people to have a level playing field and do the job we hired them for. So if we start from that perspective, it makes it a little bit easier. If you're a small company, 1 to 49 employees, or a small to medium-sized company, you have all these standards that you have to touch on: recruiting and hiring, removing barriers, workplace information, talent and performance management, and you need to communicate your accessibility policies. And if you're over 50, you need a written accommodation plan process and a written return to work process. You still need these if you're a smaller employer. They just don't need to be written down. I'd recommend that you do, because I think it just clears up inevitable miscommunications that arise, and it just makes sure everybody understands what we've agreed to before we start. That's why we have employment contracts. The idea is that we want to prevent and remove barriers in the workplace. So you're going to hire someone who's able to do the job. Okay, that's a given. That's not going to change. But sometimes the way we do things, there might be a barrier that prevents them from doing the primary parts of the job. So those barriers can take lots of different forms. They could be a barrier in information and communications. So let's think about, we hire someone with low vision, they're unable to read their screen, so they can still do the job. Maybe it's in finance, okay? They're great financial accountant, but they can't see the screen, so we just want to make the screen a little bit larger so that they can read it. So that would be a screen enhancement software. Sometimes it's about attitudes. So sometimes we have, well, we all have, not sometimes, we all have unconscious bias. It's just part of the human condition. We have to organize our world. So sometimes we might have beliefs because of the way that we've seen people with disabilities portrayed that actually act as a barrier. Thinking that somebody can't do something, or thinking that doing it differently somehow makes it worse. So we might have to do some training across our organization to be able to give everybody equal opportunity. We might have to, instead of assuming someone can't do a job, we might have to ask them, how would you do that job in an interview? Okay. The third thing can be technology. I think that's pretty obvious. So we might have somebody who needs to use assistive software. Okay. Organizational, it might also though be, yeah, well, let's stick with that example. That's the best one. Organizational policies. So maybe we've got a way that we do things, we're very happy with it, but somebody needs a slight adjustment, like flexibility in time when they start. And our organizational policy says, no, everybody starts at 9 and our office is always going to close at 5. That might be the barrier. So we might need to be a little bit flexible. Maybe we allow someone to work for an hour at home, come in, start an hour later. And finally, architectural design. Okay. So what is disclosure? Well, disclosure is when an employee or a job seeker requests a change or a modification, same thing, to remove a barrier so they can do a job. That's it. It is not disclosing what their disability is, and it is not disclosing the details of their disability. They're simply requesting a change that's caused by their disability to remove a barrier. That's it. So oftentimes, from an employee's perspective, they're not going to want to disclose because it's turned out badly for them in the past. So they might think, I just feel like I'm tiptoeing through a minefield. What if there's stigma? What if they fire me? What if, they won't give me an accommodation? What do I do then? But I will tell you also, when I talk to employers, it also feels like you're tiptoeing through a minefield. What if I get sued? What if I can't do that accommodation that they want? So hopefully by the end of today, you're going to feel a little less like it's a minefield and a little bit more prepared to actually what I provide accommodations, and I like to call them productivity enhancers. Any questions up until this point or comments? Okay. 60% of people who have a disability state that they are unwilling to disclose any information related to a disability, including the fact that they may need changes to the workplace in order to excel. Why? They fear negative consequences. And this is reality. a lot of people are going to experience discrimination and stigma when they disclose. So a lot of people will engage in something called presenteeism, where you're at the office but you're not fully engaged because you're just trying to fit in and make it look like you're not in pain, or that you're don't need an accommodation that you need, which isn't great for us as employers, because we want our employees to be fully productive, right? Be the best selves they can be in the workplace. It's not good for culture because people don't feel like they can be honest or share their concerns. It's interesting, I often hear employers talk, or not just employers, but everybody talk about the separation between work and your personal life. They do bleed over into each other. If you're feeling sick, that is personal, but that's going to affect how you do your work, whether it's COVID or whether it's a disability. If you have family pressures at home right now, which isn't anything to do with disabilities, but let's say you're caring for a family member who's very ill, that's going to bleed over into your work. So I think it's kind of an artificial wall that we put up that says, your personal life should never interfere with your work. We're kind of different aspects of ourselves, but things do bleed over one into the other. So it makes disclosure important because, again, we want to support our valued employees who we've hired and spent a lot of time training to be their best selves at work. There is incredible value when employees disclose. So let me share some examples of that. There is a ton of documentation. I've quoted this Enabling People to Be Themselves at Work by Kate Nash, that people work best when they're authentic and they don't have to act. Right? So even if you're in pain, if your boss knows that that's the reason you're not smiling, you're going to be more productive and you're actually going to be in a better mood because you're not trying to hide. You still have to do your job in both cases, but in one, you've got the added layer of trying to fake it. Okay. Second thing is people just do things differently. Sometimes we fall into that trap of standardization, but most innovation actually happens when people do things slightly differently. Improvements come about because someone decided we can do this slightly differently and improve. It can be an iterative process, right? So disability, or people asking for accommodations, can also show us often how we can slightly improve our training for all our employees, our policies for all our employees. I mean, I think I used this example if you were on the last webinar that we did. Everybody in our organization wears noise canceling headsets. Not just people who are bothered by noise or distracted by noise. We wear it because we're in an open concept office. That's actually a great tool that was created for people with disabilities that allows all of us to function more productively. Accommodations enhance productivity. I can't stress this enough. So you're not asking employees to make do, just figure it out, which isn't usually a generally helpful management strategy. You're actually helping them be more productive. You're enhancing their ability to do the job, which is what we all want. The employee wants to be more productive, so they get to, a raise, get to become more senior, get to feel more valued at the company. And the employer wants productivity because they'll make more money. So this is something that's good for both parties. Flexibility can also address changing circumstances and contexts, so it keeps you nimble. So I'll give you an example. Companies that have had people that work from home have been able to adjust more quickly to COVID and the situation that's going on than companies that, absolutely not, you're never working from home. So it's a great example of, how somebody doing something differently in changing circumstances can really help us and improve our business. And finally, when people disclose, we know about it and we can plan. So if we have an aging workforce and everybody's in the factory and we realize that they're all getting bad backs, we can put in, ergonomic chairs or a break, or, restructure the way that they're doing the things that they're doing to be able to accommodate that aging change, aging workforce. So it's important for us to know, to be able to plan in future. If we know COVID's happening and everybody's having, a lot more stress in their life and mental health, we can put in some tools to help people cope with that before it becomes expensive and everybody needs to take time off or quit. Okay, so it's actually really beneficial to know the reality of what's going on in your organization and be able to address it before it becomes an issue. questions or comments? Dawn, you're looking perplexed. Okay, accommodations, like I said, are not extra. So I put in another slide here just to drive this point home. They enhance productivity. So that can again be a change to an attitude, a process, a workplace, so that that person can do their job, which is what you've hired them for. They still have to do the primary functions of the job, so what we call the essential duties. Standards are not lowered. Things just may get done in a different way. So I'm going to give you an example from another chamber. We engaged with an employer who's going to be hiring people in a distribution center. And typically, the people that they have work in the distribution center all do the same thing and they float from job to job. So our suggestion became, can you carve out the parts for jobs so only one individual will do this, one individual will do that. It'll require a little bit more in scheduling, but the people that you hire are going to be really good at this. They're going to really like the job and they're probably going to stay a lot longer. And the cost benefit analysis shows that that's a lot better than trying to have a bunch of people that float around and then, you know, quit and leave because they get burnt out. So there's a really good example of the accommodation is flexibility in the job position. So instead of it being one gigantic job portfolio, we're breaking it up into 2 different jobs so that people can do it. 95% of workers who request accommodations do not have a disability. So you're already providing accommodations all the time. You're just not thinking of them as accommodations. This is a really amazing research out of the US, Susan Briere. So what are those accommodations? They're things like requests for family leave, personal leave, or for religious reasons. So we do this all the time. Maybe we allow someone to leave an hour early for the 6 months while they're caring for an aging parent. Maybe we allow someone to drop their child off at daycare, before they start work. So come in half an hour late, work through lunch, have a shortened lunch, or work at the end of the day, right? Those are all examples of accommodations. So only 5% of accommodations you provide in the workplace are actually related to disability. And then of those accommodations we do provide, 50% of them cost $1 to $500. 19% of businesses that have hired people who have disabilities report there's no cost for accommodation. 25% of companies that participated in this study, again, Suzanne Briere, reported saving between $20,000 to $100,000 because of effective accommodations. They also reported for every dollar invested in an accommodation, they got a $28.69 for every return on investment. So actually accommodations aren't costing you, they're helping you. They're helping you make money. And the person doing a great job and feeling pride in doing it. So what are the most common accommodations in Canada? Okay, this is drawn from Statistics Canada. Flexible work arrangements. So I start an hour late, I work an hour later. Or what I talked about, which is called job carving. So this person's going to do all of this person's going to do all of that because they each do it better. And we take one job where we hire 2 people to 2 jobs, 1 person each, right? So flexible work arrangements can look very different for different circumstances. 15% require workstation modifications. And that's, I believe, a lot of that's due to the aging population. And 6% human or technical supports. So those are the top 3 accommodations in the country. Nowhere on there is an elevator or ramps or build a new building. They are pretty simple. Questions?
Lisa, in terms of disclosure, now some large businesses that have their own HR professionals in-house would probably be far more versed in this, but for a small business, like somebody that might be listening here where, you know, you're the owner and you are your own HR department, In respect to disclosure, what would be the broad expectation of disclosure and privacy within the workplace? Um, let's say, for example, you have somebody who, let's say beyond somebody who, say, has a very visible physical disability,
Mhm.
but you have somebody that has a non-visible disability and is willing to make that disclosure to their employer. But how would an employer, or how should an employer or HR person, how do you set the limitations in terms of that disclosure within that workplace? Like how should that be broached and how should that be discussed? Like how far does it go? Obviously, probably the management would need to be aware because they would be required to provide approval for some of the accommodations that might be required, or an accommodation that might be required. But, does it filter down to supervisors then? Is it left in the hands of the coworker or the worker, the employee to broach that? What would you say would be the expectations of privacy within the workplace?
What a great question. Okay, so let's start with, if you're a very small owner, you'll know because you own the business and you're the one approving it. So in that case, but you do have to protect that confidentiality beyond that. So you're not allowed to tell coworkers. And, you may not even tell a supervisor. You may just provide that. And then the supervisor may come back and say, yeah, but why does Lisa get to leave early? And you go,
exactly.
Well,
at some point the question comes up, right?
Absolutely, it does. It's the number one concern employers share back at us is, how do I deal with coworkers, right? And in that case, you'd say, as you know, Dawn, we do a great job of, talking to individuals to support them with what they need at the time, and Lisa requires that. Which is, I wish I had a better answer for you. Yeah, and you can practice the way you say that. You can also ask me, say it was myself that wanted the accommodation. You could say, Lisa, it's, I think it'll be problematic if we allow you to come in for half days only. Would you be comfortable sharing? And if I give you permission, you can then, but you have to ask for my permission. But coworkers can be an issue, which is then where you call me up and you go, Lisa, Kelly, come and give us some training on disability and disclosure and just lack of unconscious bias in the workplace, because that is, often, I think it's probably the number one concern employers express. Managing, does that answer it?
Yeah. Okay. Keep it simple. That's as far as it has to go.
Yep. So your employer responsibilities, which really ties in nicely with what you were asking, Dawn. So you need to accept the request for accommodation in good faith. So it's my experience that people rarely ask for an accommodation unless they really need it, because being labeled with a disability is not generally seen as a positive thing. So if somebody is coming to you, it's because they probably actually need a change. Okay, so you can take that in good faith. Give an expert opinion or advice when it's needed, but don't do that as routine. Okay, so you're not going to say, well, Dawn, you want an accommodation, please prove it to me. I'd like a doctor's note. Okay, we're not going to do that. The times when we ask for a doctor's note or a third party might be if we're unsure about the accommodation we should supply. All right. You can take part in considering a range of options and solutions. So oftentimes people with a disability will come to you with an idea. That doesn't have to be the idea that you agree on. And you as the employer get the final say on that. But be willing to consider, because maybe there's a really good reason why that would be a better option. Keep a record of the accommodation request and the actions you've taken. Just put it in your HR file. Maintain confidentiality, which is exactly what you were talking about, Dawn, right? So unless you have that person's permission, you are required to maintain confidentiality and assure the person that you will be doing so. Consult with the person. Let this be a conversation. We don't want to go to lawyers and doctors if we can, right? We want to just consult the person to figure out where's the problem, where's the gap, where's the barrier, how do we get rid of it, right? So that you can be the best in the workplace. Communicate regularly about that. Well, we're consulting with someone, so we weren't sure, so we went to an outside organization, whatever that's going to look like. Implement the accommodations in a timely way to the point of undue hardship, which is actually a pretty high standard, so we don't even want to go there. Cover the cost of, if you require medical information, you're responsible for covering the cost, and you cover the cost of the required accommodation. Any questions about any of that? It looks more than it is, okay? You know, in my own case, again, I think I shared this out in the last training that we did, but I'm going to share it out now because I think it's a really, and I have permission from Louis De Palma, my boss, to share this story. So I asked for an accommodation shortly after I started at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. I've never required an accommodation in the past, but we have an open concept office, and I found it exhausting, and I found I just hated going to work, and I wasn't being able to, you know, complete my work. So I went to my boss, Louis, and I said, Louis, this is overwhelming, and I can't get my work done, and it's too noisy, and it's causing me, you know, some difficulty related to my disability. Didn't share what it was because he doesn't need to know. Can I have my own office? And Louis said, no, but I get that it's noisy. So how about we get you a set of noise canceling headsets? So that's our discussion. So I said, oh, he goes, everybody in the office uses them, Lisa. So I take my noise canceling headsets back to my office, and it was still at times too noisy. So then I went to him and he said, well, maybe we'll move you to a quieter part of the office and you'll still use your headsets, which was fine, but it was still too noisy because I train. So then Louise was, book out a private office for the times when you need that really quiet space. So you can see we're having this back and forth conversation. There's no ultimatums. It's a discussion because we both want it to work. However, other employees, and Don, this comes back to your question, started noticing that I was booking out private office space. So everybody else started doing it. And I didn't want to disclose to the entire office. They all know now, but you know, at the time, so then Louis said, when it's absolutely the other alternatives don't work from home. And that's a really good understanding of how the process works. It's a discussion back and forth. Now, I will tell you, since COVID, I've been a star player because I'm used to working from home and I'm used to working with technology. So it's actually become an advantage. So, you know, don't make assumptions, have it be a discussion. At no point did we have to call a doctor in, get notes. At no point did Louis say to me, I don't believe you. You know, I wanted to keep it confidential, which Louis did. I now tell everybody in the world about it because we've agreed it's a great example. But, you know, it covers most of the points in here, and it's not much more complicated than have an open discussion so that you can both get what you need. Any questions or comments about that? Okay, so how do you know what accommodation to provide? Well, Louis knew because he's worked in this space. But generally what we want to do is think about the specific barrier task that the person is facing. What changes could you make? And if you're not sure, call us. If I don't know the answer, I will connect you to a disability organization or a consultant. You could ask a medical professional, but you know, I'm not sure you want to go there because sometimes their suggestions can be a little bit more than is necessary. You could go to an accessibility center. Definitely start with the person who has the disability because they probably have encountered a similar experience in their past work life. Okay, so there's lots of places to go. Another really good website is the Job Accommodation Network, JAN, which is a great. So again, contact me. We have connections on our website as well where you can learn about these things, but there's not really many accommodations that haven't been given that somebody hasn't, you know, done in the past. Create accommodation plans. Now, if you're an employer of 50 people or over, you have to have a written process for this, but I'm going to suggest this for everybody. And I put a link in here. And if you go on our website, there's actual templates you can download. Okay. The reason is you want it documented what you agreed to. Because what if I go to Louis and said, you told me you were going to give me an office? And Louis says, no, I didn't. And it's just both of us disagreeing because maybe I misunderstood or Louis misunderstood. So when we write things down, we both know exactly what we've agreed to. All right, so write it down. And it doesn't have to be, it could be Lisa has been supplied with a set of headsets to address the noise. If it's too noisy, she will book a private office. If that is not available, she will be allowed to work from home maximum once a week. Right? It doesn't have to be much more complicated than that. You are going to want to, if requested, provide information about accessible formats and communication supports. We can help you with that. Again, an individualized emergency work response. So if somebody is deaf or blind and there's an emergency, or somebody has a service animal, how are they going to get out of the building? You do need to have that. That should be part of your workplace safety. And again, write down about the accommodations. Okay, it's not that difficult. Steps. Let the employee know about your accommodation policies so people know you have them and they can request. Again, people aren't going to flock to ask for accommodations because they generally do not want to share this private information. It's not generally seen as a really positive thing. Unfortunately, it's just part of the normal condition of human beings, but generally it's pretty stigmatized. If they request an accommodation, gather your information and assess your needs. And again, turn to us. Happy to take any call from you and connect you with the appropriate individual. Especially for small employers, again, it doesn't have to be very, very complicated. Develop a formal accommodation plan, keep it secure and confidential, implement it, monitor, and then review it to see if it's working. So, you know, when I talked about Louis and my discussion about, you know, how do I work in the office, that didn't happen over one day. That happened over like a month. And that's okay. I didn't mind because I knew we were both trying to come to a solution that worked for us both. If we're documenting our accommodation plans, you know, we want to be thinking about a process. Right? So whether this is written or not down or not, this is a really good process. So how is the employee going to participate? Maybe suggestions, you're going to keep them updated. How are they going to be assessed on an individual basis to make sure there's no bias coming in there? Or how can an employee request an evaluation by a medical or expert if they want it or need it? How can, if there's unions, you're going to have to consider how that's going to roll in and play into the accommodation plan. How are you protecting the privacy? How often are you going to review this? It should be a minimum once a year. If the accommodation plan is denied, you know, how will you communicate that? And then, you know, really, what's the means of providing a plan in a format that takes into account their accessibility needs? So if we have somebody who's blind, we're not going to hand them a written piece of paper and a contract, right? We're going to make this into an accessible document we can share with them. So again, looks like a bunch of stuff, really isn't that difficult. It's all pretty much common sense. You get to decide how that's done. These are just some really good guidelines for how you do that. Encourage disclosure. So how can we do that? We can educate our staff that, you know, 20% of Canadians have a disability. So sometimes you're going to look across the room and somebody might be doing something differently. That's okay. We welcome that. So you'd be taking the bull by the horns, Dawn, and trying to address that before the other people complained about the fact somebody's doing something differently. Create a safe environment for disclosure. Okay, so don't be judgmental, you know, really try to think about who's going to deal with this, who's going to handle it, how do we make it confidential? Focus on functions. So don't focus on judging what the disability is or is not. Focus on how is that person going to do their job? Because that's really what you're paying them for, and that's what they're getting paid for. Again, share how that information will be protected and use better language. So the legal way to ask this is, do you require reasonable accommodation? Okay, that would never get me to, I would not disclose if that was the language. So you can still say, do you require an accommodation to do the work that's related to a disability? Because we want to help you be your best in the workplace. And if you explain to me why you want to know, it just makes it that much easier for me to disclose. So if you have any questions, reach out to us. We're here to be, you know, the indispensable partner of business. And really, you know, help you with however we can. Do we have questions?
I don't have anything in the chat box right now, but if anybody wants to turn their mic off and ask any questions.
And maybe we can turn the record off, Dawn, so that if
Mhm.
people have questions they don't want recorded.
Well, I look forward to the recording. And could I get a hold of you anyway if I do have
Yeah.
questions? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
I'll be sending the deck out
Okay.
as well.
Yeah.
And Rory and Dawn may share my information as often as they want,
Okay.
not publicly on,
Oh, that's terrific.
not on the
Celia,
bathroom wall or something, but you know.
Yes.
you're lucky you were late to the party because I hung up on everybody within the first 3 minutes.
Oh.
As
It's
far as
getting
the-
adjusted to all these Zoom calls and
It's just,
Teams
yeah.
calls and yeah.
As far as the recording goes today, I will link the recording to our Discoverability page on our website at www.ssmcoc.com. So just Sault Ste. Marie, chamberofcommerce.com, SSMCOC. We actually have a, under our resources, you can find the link to our Discoverability page. And as well, we have a nice big homepage graphic as well that you can link on. When you go to that page, you have the link there to the Discoverability portal, but I've also been putting updates at the top of the screen as well with the recordings for all of our past webinar sessions, along with the slide decks that Lisa has been very generous to provide to us. So if you missed anything today, or even if you want to go back and revisit some of the past webinars that we've held in the recent weeks, those are all available there. So this one here should probably be up probably within the next 48 hours or so on that webpage.
All right. Thank you very much and have a great rest of the week.
Great. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Talk
Much
to you later.
appreciated.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.